Welcome to this edition of Labor Vision. Hi, I'm Bob Delaney, Executive Director of the Institute for Labor Studies and Research. Labor Vision, a production of the Institute, focuses on topics of importance to working Rhode Island families. This evening's edition will host Legislative Issues with Jim Parisi, where we bring the legislature into your living room. We hope you enjoy this edition of Legislative Issues and Labor Vision.
Thank you for joining us for this edition of Labor Vision, where we bring the General Assembly right into your living room. My name is James Parisi. I'm a field representative with the Rhode Island Federation of Teachers and Health Professionals, and I'm your host this evening. Today we're going to be talking about a couple of different labor relations topics, and we're pleased to have with us the chair of the House Labor Committee, Representative Joe Shekarchi. Joe, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure, Jim. Thank you for inviting me, and it's my first visit here, so I look forward to hopefully many more.
That is terrific. So just in terms of background, you are only in your second term now.
That's correct.
And you are chair of the House Labor Committee.
It's my second term and second year as chairman of House Labor.
Okay. And by trade, you're an attorney.
I'm an attorney in private practice in Warwick. I've been in private practice for over 20 years.
So what got you involved in politics? Why did you make a decision to run for House District 23, which is in Warwick?
Well, I've always been active in politics from, just even in high school, always been active, involved in different kinds of campaigns. I ran Paul Tsongas' campaign in 1990, and I was right out of law school then. So it was very interesting. I've always been a kind of behind-the-scenes kind of guy. But the opportunity came. The current incumbent in my district was Bob Flaherty. He wasn't interested in running again. He had approached me and mentioned it to me that he thought he maybe wasn't sure if he was going to run or not. Asked me if I had an interest. I said I would, provided obviously that he didn't want to run. When it all just kind of came together, and it really didn't come together until well after the filing deadline, that he wasn't going to run again, I said, this is a chance. This is something I've wanted to do, something I thought I'd be good at. I've always enjoyed the legislative process. I worked for Governor Sondland in the State House as his director of legislation, so I was familiar with it. I was also a lobbyist for the police, the Fraternal Order of Police. So that background kind of always inspired me to, someday be my chance, and my chance came and I took it, and I'm enjoying every minute of it.
So the House seat that you now hold is your first elective office?
First elective office. I was a delegate for Paul Tsongas, but that's not an elected office, it's a party office. But yes, my first elective office.
Sure. So it's pretty unusual from where I sit to see someone who's pretty new in the Assembly to move on to be a chair of a committee so quickly. So as of last spring, you became chair of House Labor. Why don't you let our viewers know how that came to be?
It was, well, as everyone know, Gordon Fox, the current speaker, resigned for obvious reasons, especially today. And there was an upheaval. Nick Mattiello, the current speaker, who was the majority leader at the time, was a friend of mine, and he was running for speaker, and I supported him. I supported him without any kind of reservation, and I was happy to do so. And after the leadership fight was over and Nick prevailed, he asked me, I served on two committees, Labor and Judiciary, if I would be interested in a leadership position. And I expressed my interest that labor issues is something I've always had a passion about. And I had a background as chairman of the Dealers Hearing Board for 10 years, where I ran meetings. So I was pretty familiar with the process.
Let our viewers know what the Dealers Hearing Board is.
That's a good point, thank you. The Dealers Hearing Board is the board in Rhode Island. It's a volunteer position, but it's a very important position. You regulate all new and used car sales in the state of Rhode Island. And I sat as chairman of that board for 10 years. Governor Sondland appointed me there, and I stayed there until well into the Governor Almond years. And then after 10 years, I resigned. But I had run a good meeting, and I had a lot of different points of view, consumers, dealers, dealer-to-dealer complaints, dealer-to-consumer complaints, new points, manufacturing and dealer disputes, adjudicated before my board for 10 years. And I felt that people who came before me got a fair shake. People thought that the process was fair. I listened to them. And one of the things I'm very proud about that is that in the 10 years that I served as chairman, not one of my decisions was ever overturned. by the Superior Court, the Federal Court, or the State Supreme Court, and they were all appealed. A lot of the decisions were appealed. The car dealers have a vested interest in their points and their dealerships and the consumers, but proudly my decisions were sound, and they were well thought out, well reasoned, and no one has ever overturned any of those appeals. So I'm very happy about that. I think that led the Speaker to point me into a direction where labor has such divergent points of view and can get pretty rough in the Labor Committee at times. It's always been a rough and tough type of committee. And he thought my temperament, my experience, my life experience was well suited, and I enjoy it. I enjoy it very much. I enjoy the committee, and I have a great staff. They work very hard. We try to make the meetings run efficiently. I try to make sure everyone gets heard. I never want to shortstop anybody's viewpoint. I try to come to consensus so that when the committee moves a bill out, it's pretty much moved close to unanimous. Not always, but pretty much so. So we try to get people's point of view. We try to take two pieces of legislation or 2 points on a particular piece of legislation and move toward a middle ground so that there's some type of consensus.
And you have some labor relations background in terms of your professional work. Why don't you let our viewers know what that is?
I've been also almost for the same, since I've been in private practice for about 20 years, I've been the legal counsel to the Warwick Housing Authority, and among my many responsibilities there is I negotiate for the Housing Authority our annual bargaining unit contract with the laborers, and I've been doing that for 20 years, and we've never had a problem, we've never had a strike, and the contract works well, and that you'll find if you ask the labor guys on the other side of the bargaining table that we've never had a problem. A couple of issues that we've gone to arbitration, but they were not because of the contract, they were part of the contract. We had some employee issues, but the process worked. So I'm happy about that, and I respect labor, and I think labor respects me, and that's all you can really ask for in those situations.
Sure. In addition to doing some employer work as an attorney, you also represented unions in the legislative process, didn't you?
Absolutely. I was a lobbyist for the Fraternal Order Police for the past 2 years. Not currently, but prior to me being elected, obviously. And they were very happy with my work, and I did a good job effectively lobbying for their interest regarding, policeman Bill of Rights issues, racial profiling issues, pension reform issues. If you ask the FOP, I think you'll find them very happy with my representation, and I enjoyed that, and I would still be doing that today if I weren't elected, because they are a great group of guys, and the men and women of the FOP put their lives on the line every single day, and it's not an easy job. They're being attacked. Now, as a matter of fact, that leads me to a very good point about a piece of legislation I put in because of what's happening nationally. You see in Ferguson, Missouri, and other places, policemen are under siege, they're under attack. So I've introduced legislation this legislative session that would increase the penalties. Anybody convicted of assaulting a police officer. I think they need that, and I think it's a way of saying to the public that we value the service that the police do, and they're to be protected. And quite frankly, if someone is willing to assault or attack or a police officer, what would they do to the average citizen like you or I?
And look at that recent instance in New York City where there was a shooting. Terrible situation.
Sadly, police are targeted, and the problems we're reading about, we're hearing about nationally, I don't believe they exist in Rhode Island. I think the people in Rhode Island have a tremendous amount of respect for our local police departments all over, not just the FOP, but also the IBEW guys, the International Brotherhood of Police Officers as well. They work hard. They put their lives on the line. It's not easy being a policeman. They put a lot of hours in, a lot of paperwork that has to be done, and they're very conscious to always serve the public well. I think in Rhode Island, starting from the state police all the way down through all our municipalities, we have a top-notch police force.
Sure. So in terms of a broader legislative agenda, what you hear from both the House leadership and the Senate leadership and the governor is a need to do some kind of jobs creation legislation, some initiatives to get our economy rolling. I know you are personally involved in some of that legislation. Why don't you let our viewers know what you're working on in terms of tax credits and incentives for good paying jobs in this state?
This is the third year in a row that I've introduced a piece of legislation called the Jobs Development Act, which is a modification of the current law. In Rhode Island right now, we have a law which provides tax credits. The law is primarily targeted for large corporations. It provides tax credits as they meet certain hiring goals in high-paying jobs, around $48,000 to $60,000 a year jobs, what I classify as high-paying jobs with benefits, with a retirement plan. If they're creating those type of jobs, they get a credit on their income tax. The way the current law works right now, it's pretty much targeted toward large corporations. And what I want to do is take this law and broaden it a little bit so it would apply to smaller businesses. Now, this is the third year in a row, and it didn't really go anywhere the past 2 years. So I'm looking at modifying it and changing it from I have currently put it in the past. And what I'm looking at is a way to try to make the bill much more appealing to startups, entrepreneurial companies, and trying to also make it revenue neutral. The fiscal cost with the bill, the last bill I put in the last 2 years, is approximately $7 million. So I'm trying to look at it in such a way and maybe restructure it. I've been working with the new Director of Commerce, Stephen Pryor. I've also been working with State Senator from Newport, name escapes me for a minute. I'm next to Newport from North Kingstown. He's a school teacher.
Senator James Sheehan.
Sheehan. Excellent. Yeah, I'm sorry I had the mental block. But Jim's a great guy, so we've been working on it. I've been talking to some of the people in House Fiscal and Senate Fiscal to try to change the bill to make it more palatable. As you know, anytime legislation gets introduced and the legislative process, when that piece of legislation comes out, it's almost always different in some way.
Sure.
So we're working on it to try to make it the likelihood of success much greater this year. I think it's a great bill. I think the concept is that we incentivize businesses to create jobs is a good one. Meaning Rhode Island, we need to do this. Other states are doing it. We have unilaterally in Rhode Island, over the last 5-6 years, have unilaterally disarmed from the jobs incentive business. While other communities, other states, other districts are doing it, we need to get back in the game. We need to create new jobs in Rhode Island, good paying, private sector jobs. If we do that, then the economy will move forward. And what happens is the more jobs you create, the better it is for everybody. And while some of these jobs may or may not be union jobs, rising tide lifts all boats.
I know everyone in the labor movement really wants to see jobs being created. In terms of what kind of jobs, you make an interesting point about these being good-paying jobs.
Absolutely.
Because nothing would be more of a waste of money than giving tax breaks to corporations that then create a bunch of minimum wage jobs that people can't sustain families on.
Exactly, and we all want that. It's very important that there's a mechanism, a formula as to how you can create, how these jobs are created in the legislation that makes it a high-paying job. It was $60,000. I'm kind of tinkering it to lower it to $48,000 because I think around $50,000 is a good number. What I consider a high-paying job. It's sustainable. You can sustain a family on it. It pays benefits. We need more jobs in Rhode Island, and if we sit back and we wait for the market to make it or the economy to make it, it's going to be a much longer process. We need to help stimulate it. We can't expect, if you look now historically, all across the public sector, be it local cities and towns, the state, our job force is shrinking because we can't afford it. We can't afford the benefits, the Blue Cross, the health insurance, the pensions, and we can't afford the salaries. So what do we have to do? We can't really create more public sector jobs. We need to look at the private sector. We do that, everybody benefits across the board in the spectrum. And we get a workforce that's employed and work. And what happens with that workforce is they have more disposable income. They can buy more things, they can generate more taxes, they pay more income taxes. So it's a very much of a ripple effect in a positive way. If we can create good, high-paying private sector jobs, it helps the whole state and the whole economy, and it helps the public sector jobs.
In terms of partners, do you think we'll see more support this year from House leadership, from the governor's office? I know you have a relationship with our new governor. So do you see a team coalescing around this issue for this year?
Yes, I do. For the first time ever, I give credit to the speaker. Last year when the session ended, he spoke and has been speaking publicly at Rotary lunches, at chamber events, and at every opportunity he can about my jobs bill. And that in and of itself has raised the profile greatly. Our new Commerce Secretary Stephen Pryor, who's really an expert in this area, has reached out to me. You will see an op-ed by Senator Sheehan and myself in tomorrow's Providence Journal on this, where in the op-ed we say we're collaboratively collaboratively working with the Commerce Secretary. I think you'll see a good product of this legislation. I think you'll see it soon. We're working with it. As you know, the budget comes out this week. Once that budget
By the time this airs, it'll be it'll be a week ago maybe instead of this week.
Okay, well, the budget will have come out, and then once I can put a lot of hard-nosed effort into getting this legislation redrafted, recrafted, amended, and hopefully start having the hearing process and move the bill forward. But yeah, the governor has expressed support for the bill, both personally and privately and publicly, as well as the speaker has. So I'm confident that a jobs bill will come out of the legislature this year that will be effective and will get things done.
Yeah, that'll be terrific, because everyone in Rhode Island is looking for ways government can jumpstart the economy. This looks like a very direct route and a focused route, which would benefit all of us.
You make a good point. Everybody wants that, but how we get there, the devil's in the details. And one of the things that I'm cognizant of is I don't want another 38 Studios type of bill where there's tax credits that are given and we really didn't get any kind of a benefit at all. So I'm looking at this bill, and I'm not opposed to tax credits. I'm going to make that very clear, because I think they play a necessary role in revitalization, in job creation. But I want to do it in such a way that we avoid any kind of a wasting of that asset.
That makes perfect sense. Let's move on to a few other issues. As chair of the Labor Committee, you're overseeing hearings on a wide range of issues. We talked about minimum wage, a few minutes ago. What's your perspective in terms of any potential change or an increase in the minimum wage for this session?
Everybody seems to be, on board that we need to raise the minimum wage. The question is how much and when do we do it? For 3 years in a row, we have raised the current minimum wage is $9 an hour. It was $8. The year before that, it was $7. The year before that, it was $6. So we've gone a long way in a short amount of time. And I think that it's important that we get to that 10-10, and we need to look at how Massachusetts and Connecticut look at that issue. But we also have to balance that with the business community. So we try to listen to everybody's perspective on the bill. We had some hearings before. I know we're going to have more hearings on the minimum wage and even the minimum wage tip bill. Both are coming down the pike as far as labor. We will then get together. The committee itself will look at all the testimony that was presented, all the written testimony, all the oral testimony, and hopefully we'll come up with something. I think the minimum wage will be raised. The question is, do we do it this year? Do we next year? And if we do it, whenever year we do it, how much do we do it?
Sure.
So those are the things that we're looking at. And we hear the business side of the community. The business community also, you have to balance. We have to look at this and say, is this fair and is it right? I kind of think it is, and I think especially when you look at the neighbors, it is. But the question is, how do we implement it and how do we do that? So those are the things we're going to look at and weigh. And if it's not this year, maybe next year. And if it might be half this year or half next year, I don't know. But those are things we're going to listen to the community, listen to the advocates for, and make a decision.
We had Representative Regenberg and Mike Arujo in the studio a few weeks ago talking about the tipped wage, minimum wage, an issue that really hasn't been on anyone's radar in at least in the last couple of years in the Rhode Island Assembly. Have you gotten a reaction from the restaurant owners and business owners on that issue?
We had a bill. Representative Regenberg has worked very hard on the bill, and he's done a good job. But his bill does a lot of different things. It's not just the tip minimum wage. There's a wage disclosure as part of that bill. The bill seems to be very encompassing and takes on a lot of different areas. The restaurant community is not in favor of the bill, and the reason for that is because they feel they already pay minimum wage. In addition, if the tips for that particular shift are not good, that employee, that waitress or waiter automatically gets the current minimum wage, which is $9 an hour, not the $2.36 or $2.37 that it is now. I'm learning. It's one of the things you get to be in labor. I never knew about this. In spite of the fact someone who was in the restaurant business, I used to work at Jack in the Box when I first got started. I used to flip burgers. I don't know. I'm dating myself. They don't have any more Jack in the Boxes in Rhode Island. But they had two back then, one in Warwick and one in Woonsocket. So I never knew that there was a tip minimum wage. I never knew what it was. And then when I thought about it. I thought it was a draw, but it really isn't. It's an addition to the amount of tips that you're making that year. Those are important issues. We had a very, very interesting hearing on it. Most of the testimony of that hearing was opposing that bill. There was very little in support of it. But again, we're going to revisit that bill and look at it. And maybe there's some changes that can be made. There's a compromise and maybe a middle ground that can work for everybody.
Sure. We've got a couple of minutes left. What other issues do you think your committee, the House Labor Committee, is going to be grappling with this year that are worthy of mention?
Well, you'll see a lot of jobs development issues coming. I know the governor has an ambitious agenda to change some of the workforce development. So a lot of that legislation will come through our committee. Every year we have the workers' comp omnibus bill, which will come before the committee as well. And that's a bill that gets worked on by the workers' comp court, the council, the plaintiffs' bar, the defense bar, and they come to an agreement of the 3, 4, 5 issues they'd like to amend to help make that court work even better than it already is. It happens to be a real success story in Rhode Island. Not many people know. We had a workers' comp crisis way back in the 90s. Then Director Whitehouse, who's now the U.S. Senator, led the effort, along with many other people, Armin Sabatoni, George Nee, to reform that court and make sure it works. And the court has done that, and it's become a model for the rest of the country. But every year they come in with some changes that they like to see. Not substantial changes, but important changes. So we'll have that bill to look at and vet as well. Those are important issues. Also, there's always the misclassification. There's always the apprenticeship program. I don't think we're going to see apprenticeship this year because last year at the end of the General Assembly we formed a study commission, and that study commission is working out very well. Matter of fact, we just extended the life of that, and we increased the number of membership because so many people are interested in that issue. Good. So that issue is working. There also was a recent Quincy, Massachusetts U.S. Supreme Court case, or at least a federal court case, about apprenticeship programs. So they're looking at that. They're going to incorporate the decisions and the dicta from that case into hopefully a bill that everybody can get behind, or at least the majority of people. Sure. So that's working. Those are the important issues that are coming. Also, we have some E-Verify legislation. I know that's been posted for this week. Those issues are coming, so we'll hear them. We'll let everybody have their opportunity to come, speak, make their point of view. The committee will then move forward in a deliberative process and come up hopefully with some good legislation to bring to the floor this year. Yeah.
Sounds like you have a full plate, you and your colleagues on the House Labor Committee. We wish you well as you deliberate, and we look forward to perhaps having you come back on later in the year and we can talk about the successes that you had in terms of moving our economy forward.
I would love to do that. Always a pleasure to be here, and I have to say you advocate very strongly for your union at the State House. You are a well-respected fixture there.
Thank you for saying so, and thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And thank you for joining us for this edition of Labor Vision.
All right, so we planned this event to see if we could bring some union members together and raise a little money for charity like we used to do in the old days. So we put the call out all up and down the East Coast, and we have motorcycles as far away from New York City. We got them all over Massachusetts, Connecticut. We're anticipating probably about 150 to 200 motorcycles total by the time we're done. We're raising money for Pink Heels, which is a cancer awareness and support group. They're not gene splicing or doing cancer research. What they are is a direct action network where they'll support families by buying a tank of oil or buying their groceries or getting them to chemotherapy, the real direct stuff that needs to be done.
Yeah, that stuff is often overlooked, and I think it's so critical because cancer, life-threatening diseases can affect a family much beyond just the individual who's directly affected by the disease, and I think that's great.
Right.
Where are they located?
They're nationwide, but this group is based out of Coventry. So, and it's spreading into a lot of different states at this point.
And what's the do you know the website by any chance?
It's pinkheelsri.com, I believe.
Excellent. That's fantastic. So I noticed there's a ton of Harley Davidsons. Is that the preferred bike?
It's my preferred bike, but there is a little bit of a diversity in the crowd here. I see some Triumphs. I see a few bikes from the Orient.
Right.
So we don't discriminate. Anybody who's on two wheels and they want to pay to play, we're good.
Where are you going to ride? What's the route?
We're going to ride through 9 different towns, 6 of which in Rhode Island and 3 in Connecticut. So we're going to go out through Comstock Parkway to Situate Avenue, all the way down Situate Avenue, which is Route 12, and then we're going to turn on 102. We're going to head down 102 and make a stop at Dan's Place for a little, he's our food sponsor. Right? And then what we're going to do, we'll get up to Route 3 in Coventry, we'll take a right on 165 down through Arcadia into Connecticut through Voluntown, Sterling, and then Oneiko, and then come back up here.
So how many hours do you think this takes?
I think it's going to take 3 hours round trip, including the stop. That's my estimate.
So all the participants are really making a commitment to this.
They are.
It's taking basically a whole afternoon, possibly a whole day out of their lives to do this. I think that's terrific.
Even more than that, some of them have ride. I've got 20 guys out of New York City that rode. It took them a day to get here. So, and then housing and all that kind of stuff. So they've really stepped up to the plate.
That's terrific. That's terrific. Is there anything else you want to let us know that IBEW 99 is working on?
Well, I think that, we're always active in the community, with multiple different charitable organizations. So this is just a little bit different than what we normally do. So rather than going out and wiring a house or something, we're trying to do something that grab a little bit more attention from the public.
That's terrific. Thanks a lot, Joe.
No problem. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Andrea Medeiros. I'm from the Rhode Island chapter of the Pink Heels. I'm a current member. The Rhode Island chapter of Pink Heels was established in 2009, and it's a group of firefighters and police officers that support women in their battle with cancer. We provide direct care assistance. We do different fundraising events to bring awareness to different women battling. Rhode Island Pink Heels is an organization that is made up of firefighters and police officers and survivors and other members. We go to different fundraising events and host our own fundraising events. And with that money, we provide direct care assistance to women in their battle with cancer. Costs can be very expensive, so we try to keep the money local. We are 100% nonprofit. No one in the organization is paid. If you need more information, you can go to our website, www.ripincktrucks.com.
Thank you for joining us for this edition of Labor Vision. We appreciate your input and encourage your comments. Labor Vision can be seen on this channel 3 times each week: Tuesday at 7 p.m., Thursday at 8 p.m., and Saturday at 5 p.m. Welcome to this edition of Labor Vision. Hi, I'm Bob Delaney, Executive Director of the Institute for Labor Studies and Research. Labor Vision, a production of the Institute, focuses on topics of importance to working Rhode Island families. This evening's edition will host Legislative Issues with Jim Parisi, where we bring the legislature into your living room. We hope you enjoy this edition of Legislative Issues and Labor Vision.
Thank you for joining us for this edition of Labor Vision, where we bring the General Assembly right into your living room. My name is James Parisi. I'm a field representative with the Rhode Island Federation of Teachers and Health Professionals, and I'm your host this evening. Today we're going to be talking about several different issues related to public education, both K-12 as well as higher education. And what better to have talking about education than a public school teacher himself? Representative Greg Amore, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Jim. I'm happy to be here.
So before we start talking about legislation, let's get a little bit of background on you. First of all, I know you've only been in the Assembly since 2012, but what got you involved in politics in the first place?
I had always been interested in politics. My background is in public policy, so that's what my master's degree is in. But I wrote a column for the local newspaper for probably about 6 years before I ran. And I was starting to get disturbed with the concept that the economic downturn in our country was due to teachers and firemen and policemen and middle-class working people. And that narrative started to stick. And my decision to run, in part, was to try to change that narrative, and in part was to try to bring a reasonable voice to education reform, because education reform, so-called reform, had started to go down a path that I thought was damaging, and I was correct, it has been damaging.
So you teach in the same place where you went to school. You're a townie, and you are a graduate of East Providence High School.
Born and raised, yes, born and raised. And I coached both the baseball and hockey teams there for just about 20 years. And I've been in the same classroom at East Providence High School for 24 years.
Oh, good for you.
So, yeah, it feels like I never left. When I came back as a teacher, a lot of my teachers were still there. I had a hard time figuring out what to call them. Hello, Mr. Don't call me Jim, and it was difficult. But I'm kind of a fixture there now, and I still love it. I still enjoy going into class. I still enjoy the teaching and the prep, and I'm passionate about teaching, and that's why I've stayed in the classroom for so long. I mean, there's always people that have said to me, you should go into administration or guidance, and I enjoy teaching.
Well, good for you. And you're busy as a legislator. I know you serve on not one, not two, but 3 different committees in the House of Representatives: Finance, IBEW, as well as municipal government. How do you juggle all that, as well as being a full-time teacher?
It's difficult. I would say that if I was in my first 10 years teaching, this would be impossible. I teach the Advanced Placement U.S. History, and I teach an American Civics and Government that I've taught for a number of years. So I'm usually pretty prepared for the class. I have work to do. I try to set aside that time. But as I said before, I coach 2 sports in back-to-back seasons for almost 20 years. So the time differential is not that great. It's a different type of time. It's a different type of preparation, but it's kind of the same. And my oldest daughter said to me, "Dad, you've signed up for too many things." And I said, "Ever since you were born." So it hasn't changed. But,
if it's your personality, you have to be
I enjoy
who you
it.
are.
I like being on the go. I like being involved. So it's a labor of love.
Good for you. So you put in a couple of different interesting bills, and for the first time we had legislation this year that would codify in state law a parent's ability to opt out of standardized tests for their children. And the bill also ensured that there was some kind of rules and regulations along with that.
Right.
Why don't you let our viewers know why you introduced that bill this year?
So what we've seen around the country is a movement by parents to remove their students from Common Core-based tests, and for a number of reasons. Some parents are interested in the idea that this is a top-down federal mandate that they don't want to be involved in. That would be our friends on the right. For people who I deal with, educators in the classroom, they believe that there's a whole host of testing that is unnecessary, and that the testing that we're doing in relationship to Common Core, one, we're not prepared for. The Commissioner of Education will always talk about how we implemented Common Core over 5 years ago. The reality is that Common Core in the classroom has not been implemented fully until just last year in most districts. So it's not true to say that we've been at this 5 years, but even if we were at it for 5 years, we wouldn't be ready for a Common Core tied test at this point in time. So between that and the pushback that we saw in the pilot states, New York in particular, parents decided that, you know, my child is in front of a computer for 9 or 10 or 11 hours of testing. They're being tested in their classrooms. There are assessments in their classroom. Mm-hmm. There are other tests. When you get to the high school level, you're talking about advanced placement tests. In Rhode Island, we have a kneecap science test. So the education reform movement has kind of based the entire movement on the idea that we can have accountability for students and teachers through testing. And so we began to overtest. What I had hoped was that the Rhode Island Department of Education was going to set up some rules so that parents could, one, know they could opt out, and two, could opt out easily and still have their child in an educational setting where they were being engaged. And I kind of let that go for a while to see how the districts were responding. So where I teach in East Providence, the districts allowed parents to opt out. They suggested that the principals talk to the parents and talk to them about what the values of the testing were, but there was no pressure beyond that. They told the parents that their students would be engaged in some sort of educational activity as best they could, considering the size of our school and the number of computer labs. Mm-hmm. So that happened in Tiverton, it happened in some other places, but what we found was that in some districts, parents were being denied the right to opt their child out. If they insisted on opting their child out, the superintendent would call the parent, have a meeting with the parent, and in some cases say, look, your child's not going to be able to graduate if they don't participate in this testing. Now, there is no state law that requires you to participate. As you know, we passed a moratorium last year on the graduation requirement, standardized testing.
And even RIDE administrators themselves acknowledge that parents have rights and that students don't have to take a test. We don't point a gun, a proverbial gun in someone's head and said, you have to do this, you have to take this test. So even the administrators of the test themselves over at the Department of Ed agree that parents have rights to opt out.
Sure, and we've heard them convey that a number of different times in a number of different ways, but the memos that were coming from RIDE to direct school departments were very foggy. They were very unclear. They were, I think, unclear on purpose. I think they would have rather had the communities, the districts, take responsibility here and kind of wash their hands of the whole thing. The reality is it was so inconsistent from district to district that the decision was made on my part. Again, I had constituents that asked me to put this bill in long before I did. My decision was, look, let's try to get one statewide opt-out form that, one, is available and that parents know is available, and that we have districts know that if these children do opt out, then they're going to face no consequences from the district. They'll be able to do whatever they have to do to be engaged in the classroom. You know, it's interesting because parents know their rights. Parents know that they make choices for their children all the time. We have a special education process where an individualized education plan is designed, and that plan does not go into effect until the parent signs off on that. So it's not inconsistent to think that a parent has some rights here. Now, if I decide not to take an algebra test, well, I know that has some consequences, right? If I don't take the test and I don't make the test up, then I'm going to get 0 on that test. That's going to affect my overall grade. In this case, what I believe to be the case is that we are creating a data system for schools and for students and for teachers. And the idea is to use that data to sort and label schools and students and to evaluate teachers. And when you put that all together, there's nothing reformy about that. That has nothing to do with education reform. Mm-hmm. I would love to have a conversation about real education reform, pre-K, wraparound services, trying to intervene very early on, language acquisition, stopping chronic absenteeism. All things that would have a really big impact where we know we struggle, right? Where our students are in poverty in our most at-risk districts. But that's not what this conversation is about. This conversation is a pretend conversation about accountability. And the reality is, how accountable am I as a teacher for a student that I might get in my classroom at, let's say a grade 8 reading level. And I might move that student to a grade 9 reading level, but my test might be a grade 11 test or 10 test. That movement isn't shown. So I'm going to be graded on that student's movement on this test, even if that test is appropriate. And Jim, we don't even know if the test is appropriate. It has been piloted. We got no feedback from the pilot last year. We have it running this year. We don't know what the cut score will be. And this was supposed to be a national test, right, between the two Common Core consortium. I would have imagined that the cut score was going to be common, but the cut score is not common. That's going to be up to the individual states. We don't even know if these tests are appropriate. I know that by looking at some of the released items, so I can only talk about what Park has released, and some of these questions on the English language arts section are well above the Lexile reading levels of the students that are taking them. And I don't know if that prepares a child for college and career if we're forcing that child to reach beyond where they're capable of reaching at this point. The biggest problem is context. There's a sample question that I looked at where I answered the questions. It was Robert Oppenheimer, who worked on the atomic bomb project, Manhattan Project, and he was giving a speech to fellow scientists. That was the text. And it's offered to these students with no context. Now, if you were in my classroom and I covered the Manhattan Project and the growth of atomic bombs, energy, the whole thing, then you'd have some context for that. So when you read it, you'd be able to more easily answer those questions. These students are getting this fresh, a close read, and they're supposed to put it in context, I guess, and figure out what to do with it. And I think what we know is vocabulary is the key to these tests. They're, in essence, vocabulary tests. And we know that students in high-risk districts, students who come from difficult backgrounds, students whose parents' education levels are not beyond high school, struggle with these types of tests. Doesn't mean that they can't get to where they're going, but this test is going to label them whatever. We don't know what it's going to be yet. It's going to label their teacher and their school, and we've got to move away from this because we're going in the opposite direction where we should be going for real reform.
So I sat in on the bill hearing, and there was considerable parent support from different communities throughout the state of Rhode Island. What are you hearing from parents about the need to have a state law, for example?
I've received a number of emails, even before I put this in. I guess I'm the education guy there, so I get contacted not only by parents, but by school administrators who would like to remain anonymous, and they'd rather talk to me about the value of this. But parents are coming from every different point of view. Some are coming from the point of view of a parent with a child with special needs. Some are a parent with who are a parent of English language learners. Some are parents of students who they think are having their curriculum narrowed by this focus on testing. And I think that's a big issue, and we don't talk about that much, but if you're always
Explain that to our viewers. What do you mean by narrowing the curriculum?
Sure, so these tests test math and they test English, to put it simply. Mm-hmm. There's a writing component on the English side. Math, when you get to the higher grades, are based on the subject matter. But they don't test anything else. So if you're an elementary teacher and you're trying to get your students from point A to point B on these tests, then you're focused on test prep in math and ELA. And so what gets lost is science and social studies, the arts, and the curriculum gets narrowed. And what happens is, in places where students struggle, their educational experience becomes prepping for math and ELA. And they lose out on all those other things. I've heard horror stories about music programs being shut down, about students not being exposed to any social studies until they're in 5th or 6th grade based on this test prep. So I think a lot of parents are concerned that, I'd like to have my son or daughter have a comprehensive education and really explore some different subjects besides these tested subjects.
Another aspect of the whole standardized test problem we have in this state is costs associated with it. And I know you've put in some legislation that takes a look at what resources are being used up to have all these different standardized tests. Why don't you let our viewers know a little more about that legislation?
So this bill would require the Department of Education to get data from each of the districts as to how much it costs to implement these tests and the standards, and then how much it costs to actually take the test.
Is it the standardized test from the state park, or is it any
No,
tests?
this is narrowed down to the standardized assessments. In fact, this one says park or a like assessment, just in case we switch to a different test, which is very possible as more and more states drop out of park. And RIDE will tell you that, oh, we have that data. Well, they have the data from the statewide perspective, and they have what it costs per student to take the test. But what they don't have is the costs in upgrading technology. What they don't have is the costs in covering classrooms for teachers who are proctoring the tests. What they don't have is the costs in professional development. What they don't have is the costs in preparing a class, the hours that it takes a building administrator to prepare a schedule to implement these tests. And I will assure you, it's hours upon hours upon hours. And then you have to bring in substitute teachers in some districts to cover classrooms or to cover the tests, and it starts to build. I know of one district that said, not a big district, that told me that it was going to cost them $250,000 to run these tests this year. So we have a lot of needs in Rhode Island. One of them is infrastructure. And I look at the cost of this testing, and I say, how many places can we better use this money? How about transporting Providence students to school who live beyond a mile rather than 2.5 miles? I mean, that would be a really good way to spend that money. So this is going to narrow down as to what it actually costs to implement and then to actually give the tests.
And you had the hearing on that bill as well.
That has been heard as well, and that was well received. I think there are a lot of my colleagues that want to know those answers because they're worried about their taxpayers as well. And what are we doing here to take care of the taxpayers' interest in this, which is always a concern. And let's be transparent. Let's tell people exactly how much it costs.
Sure. So another interesting education bill off the subject of standardized tests is some legislation you put in on higher education costs. Why don't you let our viewers know what spurred you on and what your legislation does?
Sure. I teach in East Providence, so I meet a lot of kids who are unsure about what they're going to do going forward in higher education. They're good students. They're going to college. They're just not sure what they're going to college for. And many of them are going to have to work a part-time job, or even maybe more than a part-time job, just to get themselves through college. So I put a bill in that would grant qualified students, and to be qualified, you'd have to be in the top 15% of your class. You'd have to have at least the state average on the SAT or ACT, and you'd have to have 95% attendance rate. So we're talking about kids that they're a good risk. If we spend this money to give them a 2-year grant to CCRI, they're a really good risk because we know they're going to go to school, we know they're going to work hard at it, we know they've got a track record of success, and what it hopes to do is benefit that student who's not quite sure where they want to go. They probably have to work their way through school. This takes some of that burden away, and it allows them to kind of take those first 2 years and not have any debt associated with those 2 years of school. Maybe not worry about working so much, worry about getting it through. So it's kind of an incentivized plan that would allow that borderline kid, and many of them I teach in my district, to kind of get a head start and not have so much debt going forward.
Kind of aligned, if you will, with what President Obama pitched a few months ago about finding a way for this country to provide for 2 years of public education for everyone, but yours is much more narrow in scope than that.
And mine is more narrow for 2 reasons. One, this is Rhode Island, and we have a serious budget issue. And two, I think there needs to be some incentive for a student who sees this. They enter high school as a freshman, and they see this as an opportunity. Hey, if I keep my grades up to a certain level, so 15% of East Providence High School, you'd be number 75 in your class. And you say, okay, I can do that, and I know that this will be here for me, and I can kind of figure out where I'm going and then pursue the 4-year degree, or just get the 2 years, get an associate's in whatever it might be, and start earning. So it's similar. Look, we know that one of the big problems we have is debt. Massive debt that students are graduating with that kind of tie their hands, and I think hurts our economy overall because they're stuck with this debt. They really can't buy a house, they can't buy a car, et cetera, et cetera.
We all see that in all aspects of our economy, where young people challenged with, not thousands, but tens of thousands of dollars in debt hold them back.
The average number is $23,000 today. So students are graduating with $23,000 worth of debt. And many are graduating with much more than that. That's a tough thing to carry with you, trying to then start a career and your life.
Sure. So do you know the price tag on this CCRI bill?
We have not gotten the fiscal note on this yet because it's very difficult to determine how many students will actually opt into something like this. So right now we know that that group of students normally goes on to URI or a school like URI. So it's very hard to narrow it down to how many students would have gone under this dynamic. We have a rough idea of who's at CCRI now that would fill that, and that cost is under $1 million a year. And if you compare it to what we would spend in just aid at URI, it's very comparable, except these students leave without that debt.
Sure. Well, this issue marries, tackling student debt crisis we have with economic development, because you're providing people with an opportunity for continued education, which is all about building our economy, which is what everyone is talking about these days.
It's a stimulus bill for sure.
Well, I appreciate your time. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but you've put quite a bit on the table, and I wish you luck this legislative session as these issues work their way through the process.
Thanks for having me, Jim. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And thank you for joining us for this edition.
Hello, everybody. Hello. And you know what? When I was walking, I was thinking about today, and I was thinking about the celebration that is supposed to happen today. And I said, you know what? This is a celebration. This is a celebration of a community coming together. This is a celebration of people who believe in what they're doing and to fight for it. This is a celebration for us as a community to stick together. As a newly elected ward council person, I am definitely feeling the stress of Bannister even thinking about leaving this community. This is a part of our community. Yes. This is what makes our community. And so this is why I'm here today. I'm here to support you. Tonight we're going to be putting in an ordinance that we are on the behalf of the state, that the state do what's right by the Bannister House. When I first started running as city council, the last thing I started looking at, it was the threats. I looked at opportunities. So let's look at this today as an opportunity for Bannister House not only to become a part that's rooted in the community, but something that grows from here on. Because this should never happen to our elders. This should never happen in this country. This should never happen where the voiceless are not able to speak up for themselves. But you guys are here for that reason. So I praise you today. I'm here. I have co-sponsored the ordinance that's going to happen tonight. We would love to have you down to City Hall. If you can't make it, I understand, but that's okay. I'm here, I'm in the ward, and I'm here for anything you need.
Joined us, so I just want to introduce them, and then we're going to hear from some of our religious leaders, all right? So, where's Dulce? She's here from Women and Infants. Our Secretary Treasurer, Almina Thompson, and some staff. Jesse's here from Jobs and Justice. This is Bobby from the labor room at Women and Infants over here.
We got Local 6 in the house. Where is he?
Right there.
And Hopkins is here.
Yes, Hopkins is here. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to the deacon from Ebenezer Baptist, and he's going to say a few words, give us some insight, okay? So please direct your attention to him, please.
Everybody that's been here a long time probably have heard this story over and over again. Ebenezer Baptist Church was once on 8th Street.
Right.
They moved from 8th Street to this spot. And when the Roger Williams Church was donated to Ebenezer, Ebenezer gave this spot to the Patterson House. And that's been longer than all of y'all have been here because this was not built yet. I just want to give you a little history of why Ebenezer, cornerstone, and stained glass windows came from Ebenezer Baptist Church. Now, I'm going to say a prayer. I'll say a prayer in connection with what's going on now. Everybody bow, please. Father God, our Heavenly Father, we come, Father, thanking you for your grace and your mercy. And now, Father, we're asking now for a little mercy. On this walk, Father, to the State House, Father, we're asking you, Father, let your Son Jesus go with us. But Father, you said in your word, if you call on my name, you will hear from me. So, Father, touch the minds and hearts of the people of the State House. Let them know, Father, that this is a business thing now. But, Father, it has always been the life of many, many people here. They have jobs on the line. Oh, Father, and their patience. The patience, Father, they love it here. So, Father, please, Father, touch their hearts and minds, Father. Let them know that the Baptist House needs to stay open for more years than it had already been open. Oh, Father, we hope, Father, that after this is over today, Father, that somebody will come up and say, let the Baptist House stay open. Oh, Father, we just love you and we adore you. In Jesus Christ's name, this prayer be our prayer. Amen.
Thank you for joining us for this edition of Labor Vision. We appreciate your input and encourage your comments. Labor Vision can be seen on this channel 3 times each week, Tuesday at 7 p.m., Thursday at 8 p.m., and Saturday at 5 p.m.